Hello Year 11 and welcome to a quick revision video to remind you how to prepare yourselves for the English Language Paper 2. So English Language Paper 2 is the one where they give you two texts. One of them will be a 20th century, maybe 21st century text, non-fiction, and then you'll get a piece of Victorian non-fiction as well, and you're asked to compare them. So there's a lot of writing in this one that you have to get through, a lot of reading for it. So what you do first is you read the first text and you quickly whiz through these ones where you colour in little circles to say what the answer is. Don't spend ages on this. If you drop a mark here but save time, it's worth it. So go for your as quick as you can through this bit and leave time for the other ones that follow. So you've got this sheet from me. I've also put it on Show My Homework, which linked you to here, which talks you through the different techniques for questions 2, 3 and 4. So you've read both texts by now. You've done the one where you colour in. You've read both texts and that takes you on to question 2. So question 2 is comparing, but it's also about inference, which means finding quotes that you can squeeze and show what information we're getting from them. So this is the one where they will ask you to compare the differences about something relatively factual in both texts, and then you have to give quotations which allow you to squeeze it. So if a difference is that in text A the athletes are exhausted, but in text B they're jogging and they're all enjoying it, finding a quotation that says the athletes are exhausted is of no use to you at all because you can't show your intelligence to squeeze any ideas from it. You want something like the athletes stumbled over the finishing line, and then you can talk about what the inference is, what it implies about what happens. In terms of structure, it'll go something like this. So you'll begin with a comparison. Whereas in source A, the athletes are exhausted, in source B, they're not trying very hard and they're having fun. And then you're going to give some quotations from A. For instance, in source A, we are told, give them a quote. And then you're going to try and say what it implies. You don't have to talk about semantic fields and dynamic verbs and those sorts of things. You can do, but you don't have to. They're not really interested in that. What they're interested in is what you can infer from it. So what it implies about the fact that you've given. So you squeeze all that you can. As with anything in the exam, if you can go for more than one level, then they'll like that. So if you can say equally, it could be interpreted to show, and it's a genuinely new, different idea, they would really like that. So you squeeze all you can from your 1 or 2 quotations to prove it, and then you flip over to the other one and you do, well, on the other hand, B, and then give their quote and go through all that yellow stuff. This implies, this suggests, that kind of thing. How many of those should you do? Well, you've got about 10 minutes, so I would think you're maybe going to do 3 comparisons. But it's as much as you can do in 10 or 11 minutes. The timings, as with the other paper, if you add a quarter of the marks, that comes out with the timing. So this is 8 marks, you're going to spend about 10 minutes, 10 or 11 minutes on it. It's really important that you don't get 8 out of 8 on this question though and run out of time in the exam. So just be really harsh with yourselves, work out your timings and stick to them. Okay, so question 3 is a language question. This is the same mark scheme as on paper 1, it's just more marks, but what they look for is the same. So this is where what specifically is a passage trying to achieve, so what job is it trying to do? Don't say it's just trying to persuade, because that's probably in the question anyway. So is it trying to make you feel sorry for somebody? Is it trying to kind of create a sense of pity? What's going on in the text? And then what are your technical details that allow you to show how this is done? About 15 minutes because it's 12 marks. So it's all the same kind of things as you did for paper 1, lexical choices, imagery, sentences, grammar. Again, you're better off starting your answer with something to do with imagery or lexical choices, and then looking how things like grammar and sentences help that, rather than going straight in and saying there's a question. So look for things which allow you to give levels of language and connotations and those sorts of things. As with paper 1, if you say it's emotive lexical choices, that's fine, but if you can talk about abstract nouns, dynamic verbs, hyperbole, those sorts of things, you will get a higher mark if you've got good things to say about them. And as with paper 1, this is the sort of things that you're talking about. So your standard thing is to say it implies or suggests. Connotations and impressions are better. And then if you can talk about emphasizing senses, creating tones, playing with associations is a nice way of saying has connotations of or has undertones of. So just think of a range of different things you can say that show that you're a little bit different from the average person that just says implies, suggest all the time. Again, if you can say implies, suggests, but it also plays with associations of and add layers to things, they'll really like that. Question 4. So this is getting towards the really key question that you must have left time for, and this asks you to compare attitudes and the techniques. So the difference between this and question 2 is that question 2 is almost a factual comparison with implications. This is far more to do with attitudes and points of view and techniques. So you wouldn't have talked about all the language techniques when you did question 2. You will now. Those things are in the mark scheme. And attitudes isn't factual, it's to do with their feelings towards things. So we're spending 20 to 25 minutes on this one. This is the kind of killer question. This is how it will begin, whereas source A tends to take the attitude that, source B is more, and then you're talking about, again, sort of feelings. Instead of attitudes, they might say perspectives, views, those sorts of things, but it all boils down to attitudes and feelings. That word more is really useful because if it's not black and white, one's positive, one's negative, it allows you to make a comparison that's not an absolute comparison. So this one is more negative, but it's not absolutely negative. So you'll say the difference in attitude, and your next line will be, in order to present this attitude, source A employs, and then you'll be talking about the language features. So these are the sorts of attitudes that you might have. Impressed, sympathetic, appreciative. More negative ones might be indignant, which means offended or almost angry. Critical, outraged, concerned. So think about the different attitudes, and then your language points are the sorts of things you would say for language. So that takes us on to section B. In section B, you're writing to express a point of view. My advice would be careful about offering both sides of the argument. I personally wouldn't do that in 45 minutes, apart from to say that the other side are wrong. So that if they gave me something, I would just go for one side of the argument. Because if you start trying to do both sides in 45 minutes, bearing in mind that you've got to check it and plan it in that time as well, there's a chance that they'll get to the end and think this is just a bit of a jumble. So I personally would stick to one side of the argument. You've had this sheet from me. It's also on Show My Homework, which takes you through the different stages of an argument. You don't have to follow that, although it'd be a bit weird for you not to have an introduction and a conclusion. This also gives you phrases. You don't have to use these phrases, but I think this is a writing task, unlike the one for the creative, where you can plan sentences in advance. There are plenty of types of sentence that you will use. The sentence where you put the other side's argument and then knock it down. The sentence where you begin a conclusion. Those sorts of things tend to be fairly standard, and you can learn sophisticated ways of doing it. The other thing that you'd be crazy not to do is to learn some good words for saying good and saying bad. Don't just use the biggest word you don't understand, and make sure that you understand the type of good and bad that these mean. So if you say injurious, that can only be used when you're saying it's going to cause injury. That can't just be used for something which is just a generally bad idea. You've got to be specific about it. But you'd be silly not to prepare some of those. I've also attached on Show My Homework the game we played, where you put down other people's opinions. You're going to get a higher mark saying, I feel we should disabuse ourselves of this notion, when you've given the other side's argument, than just saying, this is wrong. Please bear in mind, in that game that we played, there are some silly ones. Don't choose those. The other thing that we looked at is looking at how you change sentence varieties. You do repetition, you put different types of word at the start, use different lengths and how you build up those lengths. So for example, there's a one that has 3 connected short sentences joined by semicolons. You'd be silly not to revise those, and you'd be really silly not to plan to give them a full range of punctuation. You don't have to do multiples of everything, but they have to see that you can do that. They also want to see that you can do things with structure. So again, I definitely show them a short sentence at some point, or a paragraph that ends with a phrase and the next sentence of the next paragraph picks up that phrase. Can you bear in mind you are not leaving spaces between paragraphs, you're just starting a new line and indenting. But if you can do something structural at some point, they will reward you for that. They have to, it's in the mark scheme. Okay, you lot, good luck. I hope it goes well for you. Please bear in mind that you can revise for these. If any of your friends are saying you can't revise for English, they're the friends who are going to be upset when they get to the exam. There's lots you can do. I've put lots and lots of past papers and resources on Show My Homework. You'd be silly not to just work your way through a few and make sure that you've got a game plan, because you will get the same questions in the exam. It'll just be different texts, and that's what you can prepare for. Very best of luck. See you later.